So now we're going to draw the chapel, and when we first look at it, we realize that although it looks like a very complex building, it can be seen as composed of very simple geometric shapes. So the bottom steps are a very long and narrow rectangle. The 6 columns together are a larger rectangle, and on top of that is the pediment, which is again a narrow rectangle, and then a triangle on top. And seeing the buildings this way really helps simplify them, especially when we're about to draw them. So the first step will be to get the proportions of these 4 shapes right. And by doing that, we can be sure that in the end, the sketch that we have will look correct and proportionate, which is something that's very, very important in architecture. So the first step is simply just blocking out these shapes and making sure that their relative sizes and positions are correct. The first step will be to look at the steps. Again, very narrow, long rectangle, and then about there is where I think the columns will be, and on top of that is the pediment. The hardest part of these is the triangle, and the thing to remember there is that this is a very symmetrical building in the sense it's got a central axis and both the left and the right sides are identical to each other. We'll find the midpoint of this rectangle we just drew and draw a line in the middle, making sure it's about the same. And then that, somewhere on that line, will be the apex of the roof. We visually gauge where that might be. This is something that will also take a few tries, but eventually we get there. The next thing would be to place the columns, and looking carefully we realize that the columns aren't spaced equally. The 2 columns in the center are spaced further apart than the others, and then they get narrower. There's a specific reason that was done by the architects, and so it's important for us to capture that intent. And so we go slightly wider. So that looks about right. A lot of the spacing or details, if they don't turn out right in the beginning, because this is a field sketch, they're easy to fix later, because this isn't supposed to be a very precise technical drawing. It's a quick drawing that captures the essence and form of the building, and so a little bit of looseness is perfectly fine. It actually adds a little bit of movement and personality, I think, to the sketch. So once the basic form is blocked out, then we can start adding detail. So I'll start at the bottom with the steps. I'll kind of do that. And now I'm drawing the roof, again, simply because I find it a very interesting feature. And what we're trying to do here again is indicate that the roof is a fairly thin rectangle with some divisions, and we will just approximate those. How much detail we show is simply a question of interest and time. You can obviously spend a lot of time drawing a building like this because it's got a lot of beautiful detail and textures. If you were to sort of just indicate those details generally, if you didn't have a lot of time, that's perfectly fine too. I think it gets the idea of the form and the intent of the building across, and that's the most important thing. So then I can go ahead and finish the facade. I'm going to draw one column. All 6 columns are identical. So what I'll do is draw one and finish it out, and then you apply the same steps to finish the others. For the columns, it's important to work with a center line. The columns are narrower at the top, and then they flare out at the bottom. So the sides are sloping, and to get that proportion right, what's really important is to start with the center line. So we first draw the center line of the column, and then go out on equal distances at the top and at the bottom, and that makes sure that we have a column that actually represents what we see. So this is probably the most challenging aspect of drawing this building, is getting that flare right. Here we go. Now the column capital consists of a flat rectangle and then a circular capital, and so we'll indicate that here. And then the base of the column is a very simple rectangle as well, which we will do that here. And then on the column itself, we see that there's a slight gap here towards the top between the fluting to add a really nice shadow line. So we'll draw a thin line there, right about there, and then come back and show the fluting. And once we've done that, then we basically repeat that step for all of the columns. For all of this work, my suggestion would be to do all of the line work initially in a very light pencil. So that would be an H or a 2H or a regular pencil on which you're not putting a lot of pressure, so your lines are light, because in that case, if they don't work out, you don't have to erase them and they're not an issue. And then once you're happy with what you have, to come back and darken the lines that are actually correct. And so this would be the basic process of finishing this out. Once we finish out all 6 columns, then what we'll have is a finished sketch here of the chapel that captures all of the essential architectural qualities. Drawing a building like the chapel can seem very intimidating, but the important thing to remember is that if you break it down in the right steps, it's actually something very simple. That said, it is normal to make mistakes. I've drawn this building many times, and still I make a lot of mistakes when I draw. But that's part of the appeal of drawing a field sketch, is that you're not drawing a technical architectural drawing. Instead, you're trying to capture some basic information about the architecture in a quick sketch. And sometimes the mistakes or the shaky lines actually add a lot of charm to the drawing, and they actually make the sketch or the drawing very personal and unique, and that's the advantage. So I would say, for minor errors, don't worry, as long as you're getting the overall proportion and size of the building right. That's the most important thing, and anything else beyond that is not a problem.